Manipulate weaker-minded people for his own ends. He nodded to himself. So the man from the ministry was finally here, was he? Right. He walked briskly back into his room with a veritable spring in his step and over to the bedside table again, where he poured himself another shot of whiskey to complement the endorphins racing through his system. He downed the drink in one. Show time, he hissed and grimaced against the taste. Show time indeed. Larry glanced to his left and out the window once more. Maybe it was the alcohol taking effect, but suddenly the sky outside didn't seem quite so foreboding anymore. He walked over to the full-length mirror on the wardrobe door and studied his reflection. He patted down his shirt in a vain attempt to smooth to the creases, but soon gave it up as a bad job. What the hell did it matter anyway? His whole body looked like it could do with a good iron lately. This won a smile from the old crook, and he could see for the first time in a long, long time the old Larry McCulloch starting to shine through again. Things were finally beginning to move in the right direction. Soon he would be able to get the hell out of this shithole and into some place more fitting his 5-star status. He almost, felt sorry for that poor unsuspecting pencil pusher downstairs who was about to reap the whirlwind of frustration that had slowly been building up in him over the past week. The poor bastard wouldn't know what hit him. Larry McCulloch is on his way back to the top, baby. Now was his time to have it all, just like the good old days, to get what he wanted when he wanted it, and to hell with Tommy Whitaker. Soon this nightmare would be nothing more than a half-forgotten anecdote in the amazing life story of lucky Larry McCulloch's rise back to the big time. This deal he had decided would make him a legend, the day he made the whole British government pay through the nose for the wealth of information he alone had. Public figures would fall and the press would have its feeding frenzy. Oh, the dirt he would sling and the price they would have to pay to get it. Yes sir, he would make those bastards pay until they wept. And then? Then he would simply melt away to somewhere hot, write his memoirs and watch the whole sorry mess he had created unfold on his 60-inch plasma TV. Larry realized he was still holding the whiskey bottle. He held it up and flicked the glass with the index finger of his other hand. It looked like he wouldn't be needing its Dutch courage anymore, so he tossed it onto the bed. And with this, Larry walked confidently over to the bedroom door, out on the landing, and set off down the stairs, taking them two at a time, eager to meet his guest and give him what for. And he felt good for the first time since this whole sorry chapter had begun. It didn't last. You're a priest. Larry McCulloch was exasperation personified. He stopped dead in the living room doorway as the wind was well and truly knocked out of his self-righteous sails. He almost gasped out loud. It felt like he had walked into a vacuum which sucked all the air out of his lungs. It robbed him of something worse still. Hope. There was a priest, of all people, standing in the middle of the room talking with Peroni. He turned and smiled at Larry as if his being there was the most natural thing in the world. Well, Father Nichols said. The infamous Larry McCulloch, I presume? Nichols couldn't help but smile. McCulloch had a look on his face like someone had just slapped him across the face with a wet fish while loudly calling into question his mother's virtue. The man quite literally had his mouth open in shock. But, you're a priest, Larry repeated with equal disbelief. I told you he was quick, Father, Peroni said. The priest studied the dumbstruck crook who was still glued to the spot. I must say, Larry, if I may call you Larry? Your reputation precedes you. Nichols moved forwards to greet McCulloch, who clearly couldn't move, and offered him his hand. I thought you'd be taller. A priest, Larry said for a third time, as if somehow repeating the statement wouldn't make it so. Just then Lewis barged in past Larry and came into the room. Come on, Larry, he said. Shake the man's hand. Lewis. Good to see you again, Nichols said with genuine warmth. Although he had only met Lewis a handful of times, he liked the man. He had a great sense of humor and a good heart. You too, Father, Lewis beamed and shook his hand. Nichols turned back to Larry, who had gone a remarkable shade of white and was still rooted in the doorway, trying to take in this unexpected turn of events. Come in, old man, you're among friends here, Nichols told him. The three of them looked at Larry for the longest time, waiting for any signs of life. It was Peroni who spoke next. You all right, Larry? McCulloch finally tore his eyes away from Nichols' dog collar. Is this some kind of joke? He asked, the venom returning to his voice. A fucking priest? You were expecting maybe the Pope? Nichols asked good-naturedly. No, Larry said, and took a couple of steps into the room. I was expecting someone from MI5, or at least the government. Like I was promised. Lewis said with no little glee. To be fair, no one actually said that. Technically speaking. Nichols looked perplexed. MI5? What are we, spies now? He looked from Lewis to Peroni, who shrugged. Are you all bloody comedians or what? Larry said, throwing his hands in the air. He could feel his blood pressure going through the roof, the calming effect of the whiskey now long gone. He desperately told himself to stay calm, in control, at least outwardly, but as usual he didn't listen to himself. Now, is somebody going to tell me what the hell is going on here? He flung a derisory hand in the general direction of Nichols but kept his eyes on Peroni. Why is there a fucking priest here, Peroni? And please, don't tell me he's a kissogram. He had always found Peroni to be a humorless woman, but this comment won a look from her that was dangerously close to a smirk. He didn't need to look across at the clown Lewis to know he had an idiot grin plastered all over his face. A kissogram? She said. Yes, it was definitely the beginnings of a smirk. Only on a weekend. The priest replied, quite deadpan. I fucking swear I'm gonna kill Tommy Whitaker. Larry shook his head in disbelief and began pacing the room. I'm sorry, Padre, I don't know what this shit is about, but believe me, I'm not the confessing type, Larry said without looking at the priest. He ran a sweaty hand through his thinning gray hair and chewed on his bottom lip. Was this fucking candid camera or what? He could feel that all too familiar knot in his stomach again, like a fist twisting at his guts. Oh really? Nichols watched the old crook as he paced. The poor guy looked fit to pass out and the priest decided enough teasing was enough. But isn't that why you are here? Not to a priest, no, Larry said and finally stopped pacing. He turned to the priest and was surprised to see a look of genuine concern on his face but tried to ignore it. There's no profit in salvation, Father. If you're here to save my soul. You're a little late for that, my friend. The priest nodded and frowned, never a truer word spoken, I'm afraid. He said, then took off his heavy winter coat and tossed it over the arm of a nearby chair. But call me an optimist, I believe there is always hope. He gestured at Larry. Even for a scoundrel like you. Faye, McCulloch hissed through his teeth and began pacing again like a caged beast. Nichols thought the old crook looked much frailer than his reputation had led him to believe. Larry, take a seat, please, Peroni said. You look fit to drop. I'll stand, Larry said to her and was glad to see at least she had stopped smirking, which was one thing. But stopped his pacing all the same. As you wish, she said defensively. What's going on here? Larry wanted to know and looked at the Three Stooges for answers. Things aren't what they seem, Larry, Nichols said plainly. Huh? No shit, Larry snapped back, then added, if you really are a priest. I can assure you I am, Nichols replied. I'm here to make sure you do the right thing, Larry. He raised an eyebrow, even if it's not for the right reason. The right thing? For whom? Larry wondered. The 2 whiskeys he had recently sunk were making him sweat even more, or at least that's what he told himself. But deep down he knew the reason for the sodden shirt clinging to his back. It was the coming punchline to this little joke, and it was one he knew he wasn't going to like. Why do I get the feeling, he said, tasting bile at the back of his throat, that I'm not going to like this? It was a rhetorical question. The next question wasn't, even though he knew the answer. There never was a deal with MI5, was there? To be fair, Peroni said, looking suitably apologetic. We never actually said there was. McCulloch did a quick rewind of current events in his head. It was true, though it sickened him to admit it, all talk of MI5 and deals with the government after they had taken him out of police custody had all come from McCulloch himself. That left him with one more question. If these people didn't work for the government, then who the hell did they work for? It's all a bit complicated, Nichols said as if reading his mind. We were called in by the government when it became clear they could no longer protect you. They were a little out of their league, out of their, how can I put it, area of expertise and into ours. This is bollocks. Larry felt the sudden urge to get out of here, just pack up and just go, though he didn't have a clue where to. Okay, he said as firmly as he could. So you're not the government. Then I'm just fucking wasting my time here. So what's to stop me just walking away from this farce? He could feel that old familiar feeling of helplessness creeping over him, but he was damned if he was going to let it show. He cleared his throat before continuing. What's to stop me going to the real MI5? I've got a lot of valuable information. Information people should be falling over themselves to get. It all came out in a bit too much of a ramble, but it was done now. He just had to keep up the facade of confidence. Quite frankly, Nichols said flatly. Nobody wants it. What? Don't talk shit. Larry cursed himself for sounding so desperate. He glanced skyward. This was all going horribly wrong. That ship has long since sailed, Larry, Nichols continued. Your information is worthless, to put it bluntly. You see, association with you these days holds too high a price. It's just not worth crossing those who want you. Even Her Majesty's government knows when it's out of its depth. The words hit Larry like a truck filled with anvils. He looked from the ceiling to his feet and half expected to see the floor fall away and swallow him whole. His trump card worthless? Impossible. Right? Larry, take a seat, hear me out, the priest said. Stow it, Larry spat out. He couldn't look the priest in the face, but made the mistake of glancing at Lewis, who was grinning. Fuck. He cursed, screwing his eyes shut. He could feel this pulse pounding in his temples, and he knew he must look as red as a beetroot. Larry, sit down, please. It was Peroni this time, her voice softer than Larry could have thought possible. Please, she said again, softer still. Hear what Father Nichols has to say. I'll stand, Larry stated, but at least looked the priest in the eye this time. Whose face was a picture of concern. Come on, Larry, let's get you a drink. It won't help anyone if you have a thrombosis. I don't want a drink, I want the fucking point to all this. Nichols nodded. Okay. Firstly, on your earlier point. There is nothing whatsoever to stop you from walking away from us. You're not our prisoner. He gestured to the door. There it is, no one here will stand in your way. I'll help you pack, Lewis offered. Lewis, Peroni scolded, the edge back in her voice. That's not helping. And at least Larry got to see the smirk drop of his face. Sorry, Chief, Lewis said sheepishly. And secondly, Nichols continued. MI5, nor anyone in the government will touch you anymore. Not now they know what's after you. What's after you? Larry thought it was an odd choice of words. It was MI5 who called us in. Nichols paused for a moment, then, everyone knows about this famous mine of information you have. But right now, because of what you've gotten yourself into. That all means nothing. Larry thought he might have swooned slightly at this. He felt as if that truck full of anvils had just begun reversing to have another go at him. Peroni took a step towards Larry. She held out a hand to steady him, but McCulloch pulled away. She frowned. They have washed their hands of you, Larry, regardless of who you can turn state's evidence on. That option is over for you now, she said. Larry looked at the floor again. This time he wished it really would open up. Although he didn't like the idea of where that would take him. Down. Nichols moved over to the sofa and sat down. He turned to Lewis, who looked like he didn't know whether to catch Larry if he passed out or push him over himself. The man clearly needed something to do. Lewis. How about getting us all some tea? Yes, sir, right away. Lewis replied and left post haste. McCulloch watched him go and then looked over at Peroni, who smiled back at him, again with genuine concern. He was beginning to feel more and more like a condemned man. Now, said Nichols. If you actually have any desire to get out of this colossal mess you're in. I think it's worth 10 minutes of your time to hear what I have to say? Silence hung in the air for a moment, which felt heavy and oppressive to the old crook. He swallowed hard and actually thought he was going to be physically sick right then and there on the living room carpet. To hear it so plainly stated that everything he had hoped for, his get-out-of-jail-free card, his much-relied-on retirement plan, were all gone, damn near put him on his arse. Okay, he said, his voice barely a whisper. And then sat down in a chair opposite the priest before he fell down. He could feel the two pairs of eyes boring into the top of his skull as he leant forward and put his head in his hands, but he just didn't care as the last breath of bravado left his body. It seemed like an age before Peroni's voice broke the spell. Father, I forgot to mention, Larry has been in contact with Thomas Whitaker. Oh, right. Nichols had almost forgotten about the hapless lawyer. How did he sound? He asked Larry, who was staring off into space looking shell-shocked. His eyes flashed fear and narrowed. Out of his mind, he replied, still studying the oblivion over Nichols' shoulder. He was babbling like an idiot. Coming out with all kinds of bollocks. The priest snorted. Can't say as I blame him. It sounds like he's had a taste of what's happening to him. Realization can be a real kick in the balls, all right. He flashed Peroni an apologetic grimace at using the word balls. But the woman had heard and said much worse, he knew, but still tame as it was, he was still a priest after all. She smiled and raised an eyebrow as if to say, you were apologizing for that? I could teach you a few phases and an Italian too. Still, it's a shame, Nichols lamented, returning to the topic in hand. I had hoped we could get to Whitaker in time. Save 2 souls for the price of 1, to coin a phrase. Souls, odd choice of word, thought Larry, or at least he hoped it was. Fuck Whitaker, he said almost petulantly and a little louder than he'd meant. I'm the one everybody wants, 10 shades of dead. He bit his lip and held his breath for a second to try to calm himself. He needed somehow to wrestle back control of his situation, before he lost it completely. He couldn't think straight long enough to keep a level head, and that was dangerous. He could easily get railroaded into something here. Maybe it was the alcohol clouding his thought process, but he just couldn't keep a lid on the crushing disappointment he felt, the growing sense of helplessness.